Hello everyone, it's so great to see so many of you here today and getting involved with our Marshall Society events. So today we have speaking Mr. John Perkins. So Mr. Perkins is a New York Times best-selling author who has written books including Confessions of an Economic Hitman. John Perkins is uniquely well-placed to address this material, having worked in the 1970s as a chief economist for a major consultancy firm, advising institutions such as the World Bank, the UN, and many developing countries. John describes himself as his role at the time as an economic hitman for the American corporatocracy. Drawing on these experiences, he describes the post-World War II era as one that created history's firstly true global empire, mostly through economic rather than military means. Identifying corporations as the most influential institutions on the planet, he will present pathways to transform both ourselves and the companies that deeply impact our lives. John Perkins' latest book, Hoodwinked, is a blueprint for a new form of global economics. The solutions are not return to normal ones. Instead, John challenges us to soar to new heights away from predatory capitalism and into an era more transformative than the agricultural and industrial revolutions. Today, Mr. Perkins will give us an insight into what went wrong with the economy and how to fix it. So I would now like to call out Mr. Perkins to speak.
Thank you. Is this working? Thank you, Ekta, and thank you, the Marshall Society and this August institution. It's great to be here with you. Last night I was with that other school that we probably shouldn't mention the name of. It's a couple hours away from here, Oxford. And before that, I spent almost the last month in Romania, speaking at a number of universities there and other events. And it's just fascinating what's going on in the world today. The talk tonight is about what wrecked our economy. The part that most interests me is how to fix it and where we go from here. And so it's particularly wonderful to be with, oops, I guess I can't stand there, to be with people who are going to be molding the world that we're moving into, because I think one thing is for certain, that we have a totally failed global economy, and it's an abject failure. And I'm going to share a few statistics with you in just a moment about that. But the other side of this is that we are going through a revolutionary time in human history. I think we're experiencing the greatest revolution human beings have ever experienced, bigger than the industrial or the agricultural revolutions. We're really in a revolution of consciousness. People are waking up to the fact that we have created a failed economy. And in fact, we've created what I call a death economy, which is about ravaging the earth, destroying the earth, digging up the very resources and deplenishing the very resources that are necessary for our economy to continue and to thrive. And also it's an economy that to a large degree is based on warfare or the threat of warfare, a death economy in which it's time now to move into a life economy, a very interesting time where we can really look at full employment centered around cleaning up pollution, helping starving people feed themselves more efficiently, grow food, store it, distribute it, creating new technologies for transportation, energy, banking, communications, marketing, so many things. We have the opportunity to move into this new era. And you folks are right at the frontier. And I know I spent a lot of time speaking at universities, and I know there's a lot of worry and concern. Well, I'm going to go through all this education, spend all this money, and then where's the jobs? But we're entering an amazing time. And there's been a lot of skepticism around what's going on, and there's certainly good reason for that. We've screwed up badly, but there's also good reason to be extremely optimistic, and I'm optimistic. I'm going to start, though, with the things to be skeptical about. So I'm just going to share with you some statistics about how badly we fail. These things point out the failure, and I'll start by talking about the world, where recently it became known that 85 individuals, 85 single individuals control more assets, more wealth than half the rest of the world. 85 people have more assets than over 3.5 billion people. And in the last 30 years, 7 out of every 10 people live in countries that during these past 30 years have seen an increase in the inequality gap. So at a time when the World Bank, the United Nations, the IMF, and many others institutions have told us that we're getting rid of inequality, that we're creating a better life for everyone, and the facts don't add up. And during these past 30 years, 7 out of 10 people today live with greater economic inequality than they did 30 years ago. That's frightening. You know, they may have televisions and refrigerators, but the gap has grown tremendously. And 50% of all the money invested in developing countries, in these countries where these people live, 50% of that money is tax sheltered. Nobody pays taxes on it. It's one of the reasons these investments are made. That is equal, those tax shelters are equal to 3 times the amount of money that's given in foreign aid, that's put into helping these countries develop through foreign aid. And perhaps for me, one of the most shocking and most telling statistics of all is that less than 5% of the world's population lives in my country, the United States, and we consume almost 30% of the world's resources. Now, that totally tells you that this is a failed economy, because when you think about 5% consuming 30%, you know it's not a model. China can't repeat that. India can't repeat that. The UK can't repeat that. Nobody can repeat that. We need another 5 planets with all the resources we have and no people to make that happen. So we've truly created this failed system. And from that country, the United States, my country, some interesting statistics. We just learned a couple of weeks ago that 9 individuals make so much money in the United States that the average American citizen would have to work for 250,000 years to catch up with each of these 9 individuals. 250,000 years. Of these 9 individuals, 4 come from the Walton family. They own Walmart. And they exploit their employees so drastically that the US taxpayer has to pay $6,000 per Walmart employee every year in subsidies, healthcare, benefits of that type. Amazing. This company that has created 4 of the 9 wealthiest people in the United States doesn't pay its employees enough that the U.S. taxpayer has to subsidize them. Two other members of this elite club of 9 are the Koch brothers. And these are people who own industries that pollute the air, the water, the soil horribly, and in fact invest in a lot of institutions that really are out to destroy democracy. These 2 guys are very anti-democratic in a democracy. During the period since the last recession, and during the period roughly since 2009, of all the economic growth that's occurred since then, 1% of the US population received 95% of the new wealth. 90% have become poorer in the United States. Of every $1 billion of that new wealth, the average American gets $1. These are outrageous statistics. And going further, corporations in the United States, for the most part, the most successful ones, many of the Fortune 400 and 500 don't pay any taxes at all. BP, which isn't exactly a US corporation, it's British Petroleum, it got $5 billion in profits last year. Shell's earnings went up 30%, Exxon went up 70%, and those companies on an annual basis in general, on average year, receive $4 billion in subsidies and tax write-offs. General Electric last year made huge profits and actually got a rebate in taxes. Didn't pay taxes, got a rebate. So what we're seeing here is a system that's just plain not working. And it's creating an economic situation around the globe that is causing strife, it's causing instability, it's causing increased poverty and the greater gap between rich and poor. It's something we absolutely have to change. Before I get into what we can do to make that change happen, I'd like to talk a little bit about how I think we got there, because I had a role in that. I was an economic hitman. My official title was chief economist at a major consulting firm in the United States. I had about 50 employees working for me. We worked around the globe. And the way we worked in general was to identify countries with resources our corporations covet, like oil, gas, minerals, various things like this, and then arrange a huge loan to that country from the World Bank, the IMF, or one of the sister organizations. But the money never actually went to the country. Instead, it went to our own corporations to build big infrastructure projects in that country, things like power plants and industrial parks, highways, that benefited a few wealthy families in these countries, as well as our corporations, who were the main beneficiaries, but didn't help the majority of the people, because they didn't benefit from these. They're too poor to buy electricity, they don't have cars to drive on the highways, they can't get jobs in industrial parks, because industrial parks don't hire many people. And yet they were left holding this huge debt. In trying to pay off the interest on that debt, they had to forsake investments in education, in hospitals, in healthcare, and all other social services. All of these things suffered in the process of paying off that debt, and in the end, they could never pay off the principal. So at some point, we'd go back and say, hey, you know, since you can't pay your debts, sell this resource, coal, oil, petroleum, whatever it was, real cheap to our corporations, without any environmental restrictions, without any social regulations, or privatize everything. Sell off your utility companies to private corporations. Sell off your water and sewage system, your schools, your jails, whatever. Privatize. And for leaders who did not agree to do this, what we call the jackals went in and either overthrew those leaders or assassinated them. I talk in my books about how I personally was unable to convince the democratically elected president of Ecuador, Jaime Roldos, to accept these roles. He said, I'm not going to screw my people like this. And Omar Torrijos of Panama, very similar situation. Torrijos was very strong and said, I will not take this on. Both of these men were assassinated, in my opinion, by the CIA, by jackals from the CIA. Both of them in a period of less than 3 months apart from each other, because they would not do this. And in the rare cases where the jackals also fail, such as with Saddam Hussein in Iraq and Omar Gaddafi in Libya, then Muammar Gaddafi in Libya, then the US military goes in and usually calls on the military of the UK also to join them in a few other places. So this is the way that we've managed to create this real corporate empire. So, and for the first time in human history, we have a global empire. And for the first time, it hasn't been created primarily by the military, it's been created through debt, for the most part. And for the first time, it's not a national empire. This is not an American empire. This is a corporate empire. And the big corporations are controlling China today, Russia, the UK, the United States, Africa, Latin America. They call the shots. Nobody in my country, in the United States, and I think many other parts of the world, will get elected to a high position without huge amounts of corporate support. Our president today, Obama, would not be president if he hadn't sold his soul in a way to the corporations. It's not his fault. I voted for him, but I know that once you're in that position, you become the servant of the big corporations who finance your campaign. So we've really reached this situation where we have this global empire for the first time in history, and it's a corporate empire. And this is not a conspiracy theory. Most of the people who run these corporations don't know each other. They don't get together in dark rooms and figure out how to screw the world. But they're all run by one single goal. And it's a new goal. It's a goal to maximize profits regardless of the social and environmental costs. When I went to business school in the late 60s, I was taught that a good executive makes a decent rate of return for investors, because that's the only way you can get investors. We all know that. But he also takes good care of his employees and his suppliers and his customers. He doesn't lay anybody off without first taking a cut in salary. And he also takes good care of the communities where he works. His corporation is a good citizen. It not only pays taxes, which these guys don't do today, but it also puts money into the school systems, into recreation facilities. It's a good citizen. That all changed in the 1970s when I was an economic hitman, and Milton Friedman from the Chicago School of Economics won the Nobel Prize by essentially saying the only responsibility of business is to maximize profit, regardless of the social and environmental costs. And that has brought us to a world and a global economy that is a failure. So when we talk about being hoodwinked, the title of this talk tonight is Hoodwinked, what wrecked our economy and how to fix it, we've all been very hoodwinked. We in the United States are especially hoodwinked, I think, because people in the United States have no idea, for the most part, that this is going on. I'm traveling around writing books trying to make people aware of this. And that means we're not a democracy by any stretch of the imagination, because in order for a democracy to succeed, to work, the people who vote, the electorate, have to know what's going on. And if you're doing all these things kind of beneath anybody's knowledge, people don't know what's going on. So you can't vote democratically. You know, the British Empire, and before it, the Spanish Empire, the Portuguese Empire, the Greek Empire, the Roman Empire, they were all very obvious. Went out to accomplish something with the world, to spread civilization, or to spread Catholicism, or to spread Christianity, or there was some motive, and everybody knew in the country that you were doing it. Sent soldiers out. But the way that this empire has been built, it hasn't been obvious. We in the United States say we're going out to create democracies. That's a lie. We kill or overthrow democratically elected leaders like Jaime Roldos of Ecuador and Salvador Allende of Chile and many others, Mossadegh of Iran, many others, if they don't support this vision we have of a corporate empire. On the other hand, we support terrible dictators that do support this corporate empire. So we've come to this point now where I think people are really, really beginning to understand it, and to understand that the good news is that corporations are the solution. How to fix the economy? I believe we must do it through corporations. I'm a very strong capitalist, but I think we need to fix capitalism. I think capitalism needs to understand that its goal is not to maximize profits, regardless of social and environmental costs. Its goal is to create a world that you and your children and grandchildren and the children and all across the planet will want to inherit. A world that is environmentally sustainable, socially just, spiritually fulfilling, a world where people can truly prosper. And that should be the goal of big corporations. And in fact, in my country, the United States, we have a great precedent for this. During the first 100 years, we were a nation. No corporation could get a charter in any state unless it demonstrated and guaranteed that it was going to serve a public interest. That all changed in the late 1800s when the Supreme Court of the United States decided that corporations had the rights but not the responsibilities of individuals. It's been getting worse recently by the recent Supreme Court rulings that have given corporations basically unlimited license to fund political campaigns. Huge movement in the United States now trying to change that, the movement to amend the Constitution so that can no longer happen. A nonprofit I co-founded, the Pachamama Alliance, is very much involved in this movement. So the hope is that'll change. But I think what the good news here is that corporations are you and me. They're benign. They have no conscience except the conscience we give them. And under the auspices of Milton Friedman and practically a lot of economists who came afterwards, and every president, Margaret Thatcher here bought into Friedman big time, Reagan bought in big time, and every major president, prime minister since has bought into this premise. We must change it. And we're really beginning to see this. The current wave of economists, people like Joe Stiglitz and Paul Krugman, two other Nobel Prize winners from the United States, are turning this around and saying that is not the right solution. Stiglitz, who was chief economist at the World Bank and an advisor to Clinton, has come out and said the policies of the World Bank and the IMF, the tariff structures, the subsidies, the encouragement of pollution in other countries is causing great instability around the world. We must change it. This is the former chief economist, Nobel laureate in economics, former chief economist of the World Bank saying this. And today we have a whole new wave of economists like Charles Eisenstein. I'm just interested in England. Do you know him? Did you study him in school? How many people know who Charles Eisenstein is? Wow. Well, you need to. He wrote a great book called Sacred Economics. And he's very, very sharp. And he's traveling around the world now. He's very popular in the United States and in the Middle East and many other places. So we've got a whole new slew of economists. We've got a whole new slew of corporate leaders coming along that are saying, it's time to turn it around. And a tremendous number of young people like you, entrepreneurs, who when you come out of school with a bachelor's degree or more advanced degrees, are dedicated to going into business in a way that will help create a better world. Yes, you need to make profits. Yes, you need to pay your investors a decent rate of return. We need investors. We need people investing in a life economy, an economy that's going to clean up the terribly polluted oceans. I mean, just think about it. What if, and I'll use US corporations, Raytheon, General Electric, General Motors, General Dynamics, all the generals. It's no coincidence these guys call themselves general. What if we took US taxpayer dollars that are currently paying these mammoth corporations, Lockheed Martin, huge amounts of money to build weapons, to build technologies for destruction and killing. What if instead we paid them to come up with technologies to clean up the oceans, to clean up the air, to clean up the lakes and the rivers, to get rid of pollution on this planet? And what if we paid companies like Monsanto to, instead of screwing farmers around the world, come up with processes and systems and technologies for farmers to grow food more efficiently, starving in places in the world where people are starving, and to be able to store it and distribute it locally more efficiently. There's a huge opportunity here, and we all know it's ridiculous for a person like me who weighs 180 pounds to drive around in a 2-ton automobile. But that's what we do. And we need to change that. And we all know that we need to get off fossil fuels. So things are happening, amazingly. And I've mentioned these 9 richest individuals in the United States whose income adds up to so much that it would take an average American 250,000 years to catch up. But there's another whole group of very wealthy, influential people coming along. And I mentioned the Rockefellers, who are not amongst the 9 anymore. They were not so long ago. A couple of weeks ago, they announced that they were divesting in all fossil fuels investment. A company, John D. Rockefeller, back in the late 80s, really is the god of oil. He created the oil industry. He founded Standard Oil, which out of that spawned the 7 Sisters, the big oil companies. This family now has made the decision, and they've actually done it, taken all their investments out of oil taken all their investments out of all fossil fuels. And there's a whole slew of investors doing this. The University of Michigan has taken a huge stance in making sure that all of its endowment is invested in corporations that are working hard to create a more sustainable world. And I know that a lot of you are looking at going into things like investment banking. And what an incredible opportunity there. In fact, just a couple of, not long ago, I spoke at a conference it happened to be in Istanbul, but it was to CEOs and CFOs of investment banking houses and stock exchanges. And I said to them, I told a story very similar to this, and I said, you are the people that can change the world. What do you want to get your clients to invest their money in? Do you want to invest in industries that are going to make a worse world for their children? Maybe they make a short-term high rate of return right now, but what's the real investment here? Why do you want to make money? And most everybody out there, once they've reached a certain point in life, will say they want to make money to make a good future for their kids, their grandchildren, their families, good retirement. But what's the point if we're destroying the earth? And so I said to these investment bankers and the stock exchange presidents and CEOs, direct your monies toward those companies that will create a better world. And not long after that, I spoke at another conference of 4,000. I was the keynote speaker, 4,000 CEOs and CFOs of the communications industries. And I said to them, told a similar story to this at the beginning, and then said, so what do you want to communicate? You run the communications industry in the world, and for the first time in history, every human being on this planet lives in a place where he can or she can talk with every other human being. It's never happened before. Not everybody has the technology, but it's there, and people are getting it. And so I said to these CEOs of communications industries, what do you really want to communicate to these people? Do you want to keep talking about the sex lives of Hollywood stars and starlets and the scores of your favorite football team? Or do you really want to talk about what needs to happen in the world to make a better world for future generations? Because we know that the glaciers are melting and the oceans are rising. We know that species are going extinct at an unacceptably high rate. We know that the prices of fuel and food and other essentials are increasing at unacceptable rates. We know that we're in the process of destroying the very resource base upon which our economy is based. We know these things, and so it behooves us to change it. And this institution, the one I was at last night, the ones I was at in Romania, and the ones I speak at in the United States and Latin America and many other parts of the world, you will be the leaders. You students coming along now, this is your responsibility, your challenge, and I think it's a lot of fun. I think you are opening up to a beautiful time of change, of opportunity, a revolution in consciousness that's occurring right now. And I'd like to just take a few moments. I'm going to close fairly soon and open this to a discussion or questions and answers, but to really address what is it that each of you can do. And I think what's most important as I look at my own life, and I look at the life of people of my age who've gone through all this, is the really successful ones are the ones who followed their passions. Not necessarily the richest financially, although some of them have done very well that way too, but always the most successful people are the ones who follow their passions. So my advice to you is look to your passion. What is it you most want to do? And if what you most want to do is work in an engineering company, then make sure that that engineering company engineers a better world. If you want to go into investment banking or any kind of banking, make sure your banking industry works toward making a better world. If you want to go into communications, the communications industry. If you're looking at wholesale and retail sales or whatever, just whatever it is, let that objective be to create a sustainable world, a socially just world, and a world where all creatures can prosper. And I think it's really important to understand today that unlike past times, for your I have a 7-year-old grandson, and my girlfriend who's here with me tonight, comes from the United States, has a 2-year-old grandson, which will be my grandson at some point. And as I look at these children, I think to myself, what's this world going to look like? What's it going to look like 6 decades from now when they're my age? We have to make it a better place. And we have to recognize that those 2 children who live in the state of Washington and west coast of the United States can't possibly have a sustainable world unless every child growing up in England, in the UK, and every child growing up in China and in Russia and in the Philippines, in Nigeria, in Botswana, Bolivia, has that same world. For the first time in human history, we are understanding that we live on a very fragile space station and you can't get off. These grandchildren of ours can't get off either. Maybe a few will. Maybe a few people will go to the moon again or Mars or someplace, but most of us won't. And we don't want to. I don't want to. We want to fix this planet. We want to look at this as the nest that we need to defend and take care of. And so each of you, if you look to your passion, what are your passions? What are your skills? We can all take different routes. We can all take different professions, but if we all head for the same destination of creating a sustainable, just, fulfilling world, we'll get there. We need to help corporations. That is a big one. We need to push these corporations to redefine their goals. And I have to say we've had tremendous success in the past. We have the ability to turn this around. The corporations, the marketplace is a democracy if we all choose to look at it that way. Whenever you buy something or decide not to, whenever you invest in anything, you're casting a ballot, you're voting. Probably more important than the political vote, although that's important too. So it's time that we really understand this, that the marketplace is a democracy. And every corporate executive I know, and I know a lot of them in very high places, everyone that I know is a good person. I don't know any sociopaths out there. I'm sure there are some, statistically there have to be. Enron had them. But the guys I know and the women I know who are running corporations, they have kids or nephews and nieces. They want to create a better world, but they don't know how. They need us to tell them how. I'll give one example. Mark Parker, who is the president of Nike, a very, very good friend of mine, runs the biggest advertising agency that Nike uses. He knows Mark Parker really well, and he says Mark Parker wants to leave a green legacy. But he's afraid if he loses 0.5% of market share, Phil Knight, who controls the board, will fire him. And so what Mark Parker wants more than anything else is for you and every other college that I speak to send emails to Nike saying, we love your product, but we're not going to buy it until you pay your workers in Indonesia and other parts of the world a living wage. Mark Parker wants you to say this so he can take a matrix. He doesn't read the emails, but somebody in the organization reads all the emails and makes a matrix and gives it to him every month. He wants to take that to Phil Knight and say, Phil, these are our customers. And these are the young people that we're going to look to be our executives. We got to listen. And that's not just true of Nike, it's true of every corporation out there. Every single one of them. You have a role to play in this. Let's turn these corporations around. Most of the employees want this. Coca-Cola survey showed that the employees of Coca-Cola were the happiest they've ever been after the terrible tsunami that hit Aceh province in Indonesia and much of Southeast Asia. And Coca-Cola sent millions of bottles of water, pure water, to these people for free. The employees love that. This is the world that we're walking into. So each one of you has passion and skills. You each have a role to play in this. And so I'd encourage you tonight to look to your passions. Also, look to the heroes in your life. Who are your heroes? And think about how every one of your heroes was just a person like you at one point. Follow that example. One of my heroes is Rosa Parks, who, and I had no idea growing up in rural New Hampshire that African Americans in my country had to ride on the back of a bus until Rosa Parks walked to the front of a bus. She changed history. And Rachel Carson, who wrote the book Silent Spring, which is a book that back before any of you were born, I think, created the environmental movement globally. She went out against DDT, but it changed the world. And I know Rachel Parks just one day sat down at a little desk in a little house in Pennsylvania and took up a pencil and a piece of paper and started scribbling out a book, having no idea it would ever be published, much less change the world. You can do these things. You have that ability. Every one of us. Every hero you can think of a hero and know that that was just a human being like you. You have tremendous power. How are you going to use it? And you can go to work in any business you want. You know, it doesn't matter whether it's, like I said, banking or retail or engineering or whatever it is. Every one of them is open to change, and it's time that we change them. So I'm going to just close now with a, well, first of all, I just want to suggest that you sign up for at my website for my monthly newsletter, which gets into these things in more detail, johnperkins.org. You actually put in your email address in the little box, johnperkins.org. Come with me in December to Peru. I'm going down to Peru where we spend time with indigenous people, and in January to Guatemala. That's also all on johnperkins.org. But I want to close with an experience I had with the Dalai Lama and something that he said. And I took a group of 33 people, like the groups I'm taking to Peru and Guatemala, but I took this group a few years ago to Ladakh, which is in northern India, an Indian protectorate, which unlike Chinese Tibet, the Dalai Lama is allowed in there. It's much more traditional. And on the day that our group we were leaving, we were sitting in the airport in Leh Ladakh very early in the morning, getting on a 727 to fly to Dharamsala, India. And the Dalai Lama comes waltzing in with his entourage. He didn't really waltz. He walked in with his entourage. And he's carrying under his arm my book, Shapeshifting, which is a book I wrote before Confessions of an Economic Hitman. And to make a long story short, I get invited to sit in the front seat of the airplane with the Dalai Lama. And we had a long conversation. I won't get into that, but at the end of it, he ended up inviting my whole group to his house in Dharamsala a couple of days later to spend the afternoon in his living room talking with him. So we did. And we're in his living room speaking with him, and he opens it to questions. And one of the questions that was asked was, one of the people said, "So Your Holiness, there's a writer in the United States who's calling on everybody around the world to take 5 or 10 minutes off on a certain date at a certain time to pray for peace all over the world. What do you think of that?" And the Dalai Lama said, "Praying for peace, meditating on peace is good. But if that's all you do, it's a waste of time. You also must take appropriate action every single day." And so I'm here to encourage you all to take appropriate action every single day. Think of a cause. Think of a corporation that you want to turn around. You know, when I was in college, there was apartheid in South Africa. We went after the corporations. We boycotted corporations that supported it. And it pretty much ended. Our rivers were terribly polluted. And we went after the corporations that were polluting them, including General Electric and the Hudson. They cleaned them up. We've had tremendous success in many, many areas. You can do that. So I'd like to suggest that each one of you pick a cause today as you're walking out of here. Share it with somebody. And every day, send an email or tweet or Facebook message to at least 10 people with a message of asking them to send an email to that corporation, telling them you want them to do a better job, praising them for what they've done so far. Nike, we like the fact that you got rid of oil-based glues, and we want to see you pay your workers better. And ask each of your 10 friends to tweet or email 10 of their friends, and to ask them to email 10 of theirs. All we need is a critical mass, and we're going to turn this thing around. So I'm going to turn this over to questions now, but I just want to leave you with that thought that I think why we're here tonight is so that my grandson and Kimon's grandson, 6 decades from now, can say, thank God those people came together in Cambridge in 2014, and every single one of them made a commitment to follow her or his passion and create a better world for future generations. And I thank you for being here. Thanks so much. Thank you. Any questions?
Thanks. So, as far as I saw your talk, I thought there were like 3 main points in the argument. The first was that debt was being created. The second was debt was being given to whether it was working class people or developing countries. And then finally that the people who were giving that debt, typically corporations, were trying to exploit the people they had given debt to and essentially leverage the fact that they owed that debt. And because of whatever incentives they had, profit-seeking incentives, that ended up damaging the environment and damaging society more generally. So in terms of your solution, which is shifting corporate goals, I thought that dealt with the third issue quite well. So it dealt with the issue of trying to stop those corporations from leveraging that debt in like a negative way, which would affect society and the economy. The problem I had was that sort of change is very, very slow to implement because it's very difficult to change corporate mentality. It's very hard to change internal beliefs. And given that the most common way of, for example, encouraging green policy is to do green taxes, which if anything is not getting rid of the profit motive, it's just trying to manipulate the profit motive in a way that means that the outcomes are best. So to actually change those social norms is going to take a lot of time. So given that that's going to take a lot of time, is it not equally important, if not more important, to deal with the first 2 issues? The first is debt creation, so the supply of debt. And so in that sense, do you support increased regulation of financial markets? Do you support increased regulation of consumer rights? Do you support an increase in supranational oversight of things like aid and debt to developing countries? And secondly, the issue of demand for debt, which I think inherently comes down to two other types of policies. The first is welfare. So welfare reform in countries like Scandinavia have reduced desire for consumer debt because typically consumers desire less consumer goods over the amount that their society is providing for them, or a more radical solution such as basic income, or in developing countries reform. So essentially at the end of this quite long rant, what I'm trying to ask is, do you think that those 2 types of reform are actually more important than changing corporate goals, which we can do in the long run, but it's going to take a lot of time? And to what extent do you think they're actually slightly more important, and should that be done, and how do you think that should be done?
Thank you. Is your goal to be a professor? Because I think you'd make a very, very good one. It's a long topic that you're discussing here, but the short version that I would say is I think it's very difficult to change policy without changing corporations, because the corporations today control policy so strongly. I think I'll speak for the United States. I can't speak for the United Kingdom because I'm not a citizen. I don't understand so well what happens here, but what's happened in the United States during most of my lifetime, I believe the elected officials wrote the laws in the United States. But in the last couple of decades, that's diminished significantly. Today, the laws are written by corporate lobbyists, the big laws, the important laws, passed through the politicians who the corporate lobbyists are supporting with campaign financing. And it doesn't really matter a whole lot what the people think. When there was a discussion of whether to go into the Iraq War or not back in 2002, the biggest demonstration ever occurred in Washington, D.C., in the United States. The politicians didn't listen. They listened to the corporations that knew they could make a lot of money off war. And this goes on and on and on. So I think it's all integrated here, but we have to bring the corporations around in order to bring the policy around. And I agree we need policy changes. I think we need a world body that will oversee a lot of these things and be able to have some teeth. We've seen a case in Ecuador where Texaco polluted tremendous amounts of the Ecuadorian rainforest, 19 billion gallons of toxic water. And they were taken to court by 30,000 Ecuadorians, class action suit. Texaco, now owned by Chevron, so it's Chevron, lost the case. We're served a fine of $9.5 billion to clean it up, and are refusing to do it. And they're saying they have no assets in Ecuador, so Ecuador has no recourse. Canada is now saying they may take some of Chevron's assets and give it to Ecuador. We'll see what happens, but there needs to be actually a world court that would be able to and really have teeth. But I think beyond that, we must change the corporations. And I disagree that I don't think it has to take that long. I mean, look what we've seen happen. Look how quickly corporations change when something comes along like Facebook or the internet. I mean, corporations change very, very rapidly when times change. You look at a war. I mean, and again, in the United States, the way we geared up to building ships like that when we decided to get into the war, and we see it time and time again. Huge, fast turnarounds in corporations, if they're given the incentive. And I think the incentive is there now. And I think you guys, as you come into power in the corporations, will be the incentive. I think a lot of that will come from you. And I'd also like to comment and mention sociopaths. That I don't know any, and I don't think most executives are not. But even the few that are, if we let them know that the way they're going to profit is by creating a better world, they will create a better world. But thanks. That was a short answer to a long question, but it's a very important topic. And I would really encourage you to go deeper into it. That sounds like your passion. You've got a deep passion for this. So make this your life. Really explore that. How are you going to do this? How are you going to create these international bodies? And how are you going to get regulations involved? And I think you're going to find that you're going to have to get some of the big corporations on your side in order to make it happen. But I'd really encourage you to look for that. What's your name? Aisa. We'll look for your name in the newspaper soon. Thank you. Somebody else.
Why do you think that following your passion is a good idea if you want to have a significant social impact? Because I think it goes actually against the idea of having a significant social impact. Because I want to do something good, so if I followed my passion, I would join a charity, but I'm just replacing a position of a person who wants to do exactly the same kind of good as I want to. So if I'm going to be a bit more economic and pragmatic in what I do, for example, I decided to go into consulting in the next years just to create a career capital. I'm not following my passion, but I think that I'm working towards this greater goal, which in the future will be having some kind of a good impact as opposed to just, basically just to sum up, I think that following your passion doesn't exactly go with the idea of doing as much good as possible, provided this is your passion. So what would you say about that?
Well, what I would say is I don't think you can be successful personally if you don't follow your passion. So I didn't follow my passion when I became an economic hitman, and I had all the trappings of success. I was flying around the world first class, making pretty good money, eating in the best restaurants, wining and dining with presidents, and I was taking a hell of a lot of Valium and drinking a lot of alcohol. I was miserable. And now I'm staying in a little bed and breakfast over here. I'm not living first class, but I'm enjoying this immensely. I'm following my passion, which is being with you guys, being with your Oxford friends across town the other day, being with your Harvard friends when I'm in the States, and with the Romanian students, and with people all over the world. So I think your passion is making a better world, it sounds like. Is that correct?
Yeah, we can say that. I mean, another issue I had with following your passion is that I would feel as if I was a very cocky person if I knew what my passion is at the age of 20. And I kind of feel like we need more empirical data to actually decide what this passion is.
Well, passion doesn't come from empirical data, and I hear your passion. I mean, you were saying you would work for a nonprofit organization, a charity, and you'd want to go into consulting so that you can convince people to make a better world. That's your passion.
Yeah, basically, I think like passion should be one of the factors which we take into account while deciding what we want to do, but it shouldn't be the prevailing one which determines everything else. I think there is some research which was done by the charities which are part of the effective altruism movement. I'm not sure if you've heard of this before.
No.
So effective altruism, actually I'm not going to do a lecture right now. So basically the research they did is that like the factors which should be taken into account when you're trying to make the world a better place is something like a satisfaction flowing just from the fact of being challenged in the place of work. So what they proposed is first you create a list of professions which you would consider entering, and then once you already restricted yourself from something like following a passion of dealing cocaine, then you actually can use the passion and your determinations and have an impact while doing something which you're satisfied with, but not necessarily passionate about.
Doesn't sound like a good life to me, but go ahead and try it if you want. I would just say that myself and everybody that I know, and I've known a lot of people and I've lived a lot of years, the happiest people, the most prosperous in a true sense of the word prosperity, are the ones that have followed their passions. And the passion, that doesn't mean every day you do something that you absolutely love doing, I mean, I'm a writer and I have to spend a lot of time doing research and editing and stuff I'm not very passionate about those particular parts, but I'm passionate about the overall picture of the whole thing. I'm passionate about what I accomplish, I'm not passionate about the 2.5 hours I spent in the car today going around roundabouts getting from Oxford to here, but I'm passionate about being here tonight, and I was passionate about being in Oxford last night. So, I mean, yeah, we have to make compromises in life. Life's full of a lot of tedious stuff, but I would really urge you to go deep into that passion and then look at how you can most satisfy that in a realistic way. Thanks. So thanks for bringing that up. It was interesting. I'd like to continue that conversation sometime. Do we have time for more? I don't know Ekta, how time limited are we? I see it's 8 o'clock. We all right? I'm fine.
Yeah, first of all, thanks for the talk. You touched on the corporations and us as individuals, but I was just wondering what your view on the government's role is in developed countries. So we have policies such as foreign aid, we argue trying to sort of liberalize trade and sort of break down trade barriers, but how effective do you think these have been, and what role do you think our developed world's governments have to play in sort of breaking down the inequality between the two worlds?
Well, the role is huge, and I think, as Stiglitz has said, who's been right in the trenches, chief economist at the World Bank, that what he feels is that in the last decade or two, that the role of government in encouraging highly subsidized businesses in places like the United States and Europe and places like this, and encouraging us to export pollution. So the government of the United States, for example, makes a big thing about not polluting our oceans, for no oil rigs off the coast of California or Florida or anyplace else. But that at the same time, we're polluting the Amazon and we're polluting the Middle East, and I think that's extremely poor planning. That's a poor way to look at the world. But that's a government policy that has tremendous power. And I think we really need to look more deeply at this. So government policies are very, very important. Again, I would say that to a large degree, they're driven by the corporations. I'll give you an example, fairly quick one. Florida Power and Light, one of the 5 largest utility companies in the United States, was in fact the least air polluting utility company in the United States, mainly because they own 4 nuclear units and a lot of gas turbines. They were mandated by the Public Utility Commission of Florida to build a huge coal plant. And so they started going around the state finding a site for the coal plant. At the same time, the CEO went to Washington and kept lobbying against any restrictions on carbon dioxide emissions, any laws that would restrict that, because now he's going to create a lot of them. But the people of Florida, in no community would allow the plant to be built. They would not allow the permits to happen. And so finally Florida Power and Light made the decision not to build the coal plant, but instead to go with solar and wind, and they are now the largest developer in the United States of solar and wind power, not just in Florida, but all over, and in fact one of the largest in the world. And now the president every month goes to Washington and lobbies for stricter regulations against carbon dioxide pollution. So here's a government policy that's being debated a lot. How strongly do we regulate carbon dioxide? And here's a major corporation that a couple of years ago was lobbying very strongly against any limitations on carbon dioxide, and now it's lobbying for it because the people of Florida spoke. The voters, the people of Florida, spoke in the marketplace, essentially. And I think that's a really important lesson. And that corporation now is taking a very strong stance and being heard. Better than any of us would be heard, you know. So I think we have to look at both those issues. And again, I'd encourage you to go deeper into, all of you, any questions you have or thoughts you're having, this is your passion. This is what we mean, you know, really follow that, do it. Thanks. Are we okay, Ekta? Let's do one more.
Okay, thank you very much. Sorry. There's maybe a small question when, I mean, I almost completely agree with what you say, especially with the thing of passion. But I was thinking, when you say the part of let's talk to 10 friends, let's talk to 10 friends, I will remember the problem of the, I don't know how to say it in English, this problem, neurodegenerative syndrome, that they create a viral movement on Facebook of the Ice Bucket Challenge. Yep, that's the name. So I was wondering, because one of the arguments they say against or in pro that is that most of the people don't care about the problem by itself, but they create about the fashion, the movement. But other people say, well, that's true, but at least they mention it. So I was wondering, which is your opinion related to that? Because we can help creating spam movements like, please stop deforestation, please help this, please help that. And we can have a fake illusion that we are doing right, even though we are just letting the message pass. So I was thinking, which is your opinion related to that point?
Yeah, I'm not, the Ice Bucket Challenge, that's, yeah. But I'm not quite sure what the question is, again.
In the Ice Bucket Challenge, although it was for an important reason, this disease...
People got caught up in just the process of dumping a bucket of ice over their head.
They like it a lot.
So. Yeah. Well, you know, it's... gimmicks like that work in the short run often, but not in the long run. So we have to go deeper than that. But it does bring out the message in a way. And you know, perhaps an analogy would be the Occupy movement. So we had this very strong Occupy movement that lasted a few months, and then people say, well, it went away, but it didn't really go away because it has had a huge impact on people's thinking. It woke people up. And I think something like the Ice Bucket Challenge probably woke quite a few people up. All that ice on your head has to wake you up, right? I mean, I think, so we don't know what these things accomplish in the long run. One of the things that we do know is that it doesn't take a lot of people to change things. The critical mass. We don't know what that is. It may be 10% of a population, maybe only 1%. But we know that that critical mass, if we can get through that critical mass, if getting people to put a bucket of ice over their head gets them to start thinking about the topic, then we don't know how far that's going to go, but we know it has a huge impact. And I think, you know, there's an interesting idea that there's a lot of people that don't change anything because they're too poor. They're so concerned with just making a living every day. There's another bunch of people who don't change anything because they've got life too easy. It's not that they're extremely wealthy, but they've just got life pretty easy. That probably include a lot of us here. So they don't bother to try to change things. But then you've got this, and then there's another group of people that's just plain apathetic. You know, they go to work every day and then they come home and watch television. But then you've got this critical mass. there's a group of people that are the activists, and they constantly are. We've had change over this human species pretty radically. And I think we're at a point in time now where that has become so important that we truly are waking up. Consciousness is changing. You know, we do have this, when our astronauts went up to the moon and came back and they saw that, you know, this classic view of the green, blue Earth, and it changed our attitudes a lot, and they've been changing ever since, that we're really waking up to the fact that we've created a failure, and yet it also say it's been a huge success. So the economy that I'm kind of criticizing here has actually created amazing science, technology, medicine, art, music. It's been amazing, but now it's gone a little too far. We got to be careful not to go too far. I remember reading one time that the automobile was seen as the solution to pollution because London, New York, Chicago were inundated with horse manure. The streets were filled with horses and horse manure, and all the countryside around the big cities, a tremendous amount of land was being devoted to raising food for horses. And so there was horrible pollution and destruction of land. When the automobile came along, it was looked as the salvation, and it was for a while, but now it's become the polluter. So all of these things we have to take with a certain amount of balance. So the bucket phenomena can wake people up, but then we have to keep them moving. Keep them moving. You keep them moving. Hit them over the head with a bucket of ice and then keep them moving in that direction, whatever the direction is you choose. So I think if this idea of sending an email out to 10 people every day and asking them to send it to 10 people and 10 people, if you just do it once, it's that bucket of ice. But if you do it every day or every couple of days, and you keep doing it, and doing it, and doing it, and doing it, it becomes much more than that. It becomes a systemic approach to creating change. So, do you want to say anything more to people, Hector? Do you want to promote the Marshall Society or talk about the next event or anything? Thank you people very, very much. Appreciate it.